Let's talk about
politics, environmental science,
global warming,
constitutional rights,
social and economic challenges,
money, power, choice.
Nature does not compromise.
extreme droughts, extreme heat waves.
sea levels are rising, and it is
About climate change.
This is the future of the next generations.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Talk About Climate, a podcast where we talk about climate change and how it relates to all of us. Join us, Change the Chamber Fellows, as we talk with scientists, grassroots campaigners, politicians, and more as we open up the conversation on climate. Today, I'm your host, Sarah Hill, and we're joined by our special guest, Riley Mack, from Fossil Fuel Free UConn on the University of Connecticut campus, where we will be discussing campus organizing and the divestment movement. Welcome. To start us off, well, I am a former UConn student and have been supporting FFFU, as Fossil Fuel Free UConn is known. Riley, would you explain to our listeners what FFFU is and how the group got started?
Well, listeners, so FFFU wasn't the first organization at UConn. I don't think it'll probably be the last one that it has been focusing on climate issues. So there was originally in 2015, there was a group called E-Coalition that was created. We are, in a sense, a successor to that organization. So E-Coalition lasted till I'd like to say 2019. And I believe that one was more focused on divestment to some degree. We are still also focused on divestment, but mostly on decarbonization. So back in the fall, summer kind of fall of 2022, my older brother, Chase Mack, he also went to UConn. He started contacting several graduate and undergraduate students, some student organizations and professors, and he was trying to build a coalition of sorts, primarily focusing on decarbonization on our campus. UConn is kind of in a unique position compared to other campuses in that we have our own power grid, like a minor grid in a sense, where we have a natural gas cogeneration plant that provides most of our power. And so decarbonization in our case is trying to push the university to find a means of dealing with it because the cogen plant is set to expire in 2040. So the university at the time didn't really have a plan on how to kind of transition it away from that. I think they're currently focusing on transitioning it to hydrogen power. So we've been talking with the university in that regard. So it's going for a timeline of things, at least with decarbonization. We had launched some protests in 2022, 2023. The university then promised to have a sustainability action plan set in place by, I believe it was the fall semester of 2023. That ended up getting pushed off. And then eventually we had it this past spring semester, spring 2024 is when we eventually had it. It was a 20-page document, mostly pictures, not an actual sustainability action plan. So, in other words, that sustainability in action plan didn't really amount to much. So, moving forward, decarbonization has somewhat shifted, we've gotten into further talks with the UConn administration. We had something that was previously set up in previous years called EPAC that was meant to kind of deal with this. I forget what EPAC stands for. It's been recently renamed to SPEAK, so we're currently in talks with admin in regards to decarbonization, and I'd say it's been progressing fairly well. So over time, our coalition kind of evolved over time as well. My brother, who's now a graduate student at UConn, he goes to another campus, but took a gap year in between then. So he was graduating effectively that same year. So Triple FU, we kind of needed to kind of refocus on some things. We had like several students graduating, several seniors, even the year following. So Colin Rosadino kind of took the reins to some degree. Now, it's not to say that he's the leader of Triple FU. We don't really have a centralized structure like that. It's more of a group of leaders that work together, but he kind of is like more of like one of the more vocal components of our organization. So this is like fall of 2023, which is when I joined. We started pushing as well on the divestment front. So our three goals are divestment, decarbonization, and disclosement. Disclosement is more of just universities should be open on these matters. So divestment in our case is more focusing on a private entity that handles most of UConn's money called the UConn Foundation. It got privatized, I believe, around 2011, I'd like to say. And so they haven't fully disclosed its investments in this matter in regards to divestment and such. And so Triple FU effectively going back to like how saying how the group got started, we were started as a coalition of sorts, trying to bring together a bunch of different people around campus to, at the time, primarily focus on decarbonization.
Wow, very cool. A lot of history there, and thank you so much for sharing all of it. So you talked a little bit about how UConn is unique, which I definitely appreciate. But I'm wondering, and I'm sure our listeners would be interested in hearing, what inspiration have you taken from other campuses, divestment or decarbonization, like you said, movements and their successes or failures, as unfortunately can happen?
So I guess in a sense of this question, we've talked with other universities about divestment, especially. We've had members of our organization go to Brown. We've seen like I think it was like there's like one in New York. I think UMaine had some rather success about this sort of stuff. So divestment is a bit of a more difficult fight because it's more of like it's like more indirect, so to say, involvement with climate change. So admin, they kind of get a little bit finicky with money, so to say. So I'd say um, from learning, talking with other organizations, we've learned that strategy-wise, we've just learned different strategies on how to put pressure on admin. Although to what success is hard to say because at least on the divestment front, we've been getting a bit more pushback. Decarbonization has been easier to talk to admin about, 100%.
Good. Um, could you share any of the admin responses to decarbonization if you remember them?
Um, so decarbonization, they've mostly stalled with decarbonization, I would say. Um, they had us go through the ringer with a bunch of different people that weren't completely involved or didn't know enough about it, or were talking about just random things that were unrelated, didn't quite understand the group. Uh, as when the group got started, we were able to talk with the university president about it. She has been kind of she doesn't really talk to us much anymore, doesn't really respond much to emails, so she's been kind of pushing it off onto other groups. For whatever reason, the UConn Office of Sustainability hadn't really been involved in the process for whatever reason for decarbonization. So now they're more involved. I'd say from our end, generally speaking, some challenges we face is the stalling, to some extent shutting down free speech and just generally being dismissive. Stalling talks is common that a lot of universities try it because, you know, college students, if you're talking about like a typical one, if you're going for an undergraduate, you're only there for 4 years. And even if you're a graduate student, you don't really have as much time to put as much effort into extracurriculars because of how stressful the course load can be. So the universities will often just wait out these sort of movements, try to wait for them to die down, especially with pressure. So that's one thing that's a challenge I would say we've had to face. Free speech shut down. So effectively, protesting got a lot more difficult in response to the Palestine protests from last year because there was this major encampment at UConn, at other universities. So in our case, the day after the encampment got started, UConn changed a bunch of their policies, I think regarding tents, amplified sounds, among other things. So the university changed a lot of policies that clamped down and they sent in like 80 police officers, arrested 25 students. So that was like another, I'd say, major hurdle in that by proxy because of the Palestine protests, they've gotten a lot more, I'd say it's a lot more difficult to kind of worm your way in that through that manner. And I'd say that another issue is just their generally dismissive attitudes among some figures. Like the UConn Foundation, we got our foot through the door, we had our research done, we were ready to present it, and they pretty much just throw it out. So another issue that we've had to deal with is just some parts of admin just not really caring as much.
Definitely, that's challenging.
Mhm.
Do you expect the same challenges going forward? And do you have any advice for other campus organizers, especially in this challenging time?
Mm. Some advice I would like to say is try to keep your organization focused. There may be some ways the university may try to misdirect blame to some degree, so you gotta keep yourself on track, have like a proper plan in motion, and try to, be prepared in that sense. Another piece of advice I would say is sometimes things can just generally bog down. Administration has a far different time clock compared to students because you'll have administrators that are in there for like 10, 20 years. So it's like something that may seem more, we like, you want to push it, like get a lot of time, push it forward. Admin, they may think like, oh, things are progressing pretty well, even though from a student's perspective, things may be just going pretty slow. If you want to be talking about the general political scene, especially with how many students feel about Trump's inauguration, I would say that each region, each university, each state is a unique example. Um, Things may seem a bit stressful on the national level, but I would say sometimes you got to focus on the local level to some degree. Try to keep yourself a bit grounded. Like things may not be progressing in one avenue, but try to find ways to progress in other avenues. Sometimes things may be difficult one way, so you just got to recenter yourselves and focus on like which ways you can make your change. Because I'd say a lot of people can kind of fall into a bit of a nihilistic approach to things and especially feel stress because, you feel like you're not really amounting much, but the little changes matter too. What little, what may seem like little impact can mean a major thing, especially when you find these changes all across the country around the world. So like even if it may seem small, your impact is still notable.
Definitely,
And
that's really important to remember.
and just because some things may seem like there's no progress doesn't mean that nothing is happening behind the scenes.
Exactly. Such good advice. Thank you so
I,
much for sharing.
I would also like to say as a general advice for organizations is try to continue networking, focus in and around your organization and like your university. like even if a student body can be generally supportive of what you're doing, there's like a difference between support and engagement, I would say. Try to talk to people that may be on the fence, talk to different people about about their concerns, and try to keep yourself from forming an echo chamber of sorts, because echo chambers can also be pretty, they can also make things a lot more difficult as an organization.
Definitely. I love that advice too. Support versus engagement. I think sometimes we can forget about that, but so important to keep in mind. So thank you for joining us. It was such a pleasure to get to know you and hear about campus organizing on my own alma mater. And to wrap up this episode, we like to give our guest 60 seconds to just pitch or share anything you're working on, what you're excited about, or anything you'd like to share. The floor is yours.
Well, I would say that as an organization, I am quite excited to see how the talks with admin go. I'm really interested in how decarbonization can be progressed on our campus. I'm interested to see how student groups can continue to organize and continue to push things in admin. Um, even though you can feel the stress of having Trump return to office, it doesn't mean that you can't just, you know, um, try to like be prepared in other ways. I'm just excited to see the progress that we're making, even though in some ways some things may be taking a step back. At least we're going forward in other ways.
Definitely, so important. Thank you so much, Riley, for joining us today. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of Let's Talk About Climate. Before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, and rate us 5 stars on your podcast platform. Follow us on Instagram at Let's Talk About Climate Pod and Twitter or X as @TalkClimatePod. And check out our website at changethechamber.org. You can find all the links in the description. This was Let's Talk About Climate. Thanks for joining us.